The package arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. No return address, no explanation. Just my name written across the front. Elena Brooks, not Elena Whitaker. Not the name I had spent 9 years trying to forget. My hands were already shaking before I opened it, because only a few people in Savannah still remembered who I used to be. Before the headlines, before the whispers, before an entire town looked at me and saw the woman who failed her own child. Inside the box was an old church envelope, a handwritten note, and a small silver rattle. The moment I saw it, I stopped breathing, because that silver rattle belonged to my son, Samuel. The same silver rattle I held in my hands 9 years earlier. The same one his grandfather placed beside him during the final goodbye. The same one I was told was gone forever, so why was it sitting on my kitchen table? 9 years later. Perfectly polished, perfectly preserved, like someone had been keeping it, waiting. I turned the rattle over, and that was when I saw something I had never noticed before. A tiny engraving hidden beneath the handle. Not Samuel's name, not a date, just 4 words. Forgive me. I lied. For 9 years, I believed I destroyed my family. I believed one mistake, one moment I could never take back, had taken everything from me. My marriage, my home, my future, my son. And the worst part? The people who convinced me I was responsible were the same people who held me while I cried. My name is Elena Brooks. 9 years ago, I married into the Whitaker family, one of the most respected families in Savannah, Georgia. Judges, attorneys, charity leaders, the kind of family whose name appeared on buildings before you even walked inside. When the Whitakers spoke, people trusted them. When I spoke, people felt sorry for them. After Samuel was gone, my husband Matthew stopped looking at me the same way. His family said grief changes people, but grief wasn't what changed him. A secret did. A secret someone inside that house protected for almost 40 years. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I lost everything, and somehow everyone else got to move forward. Matthew rebuilt his life, the Whitakers protected their reputation, and I spent 9 years apologizing for something I didn't understand. Until that silver rattle arrived. At first, I thought someone was being cruel. A sick reminder of the worst day of my life. Then I found out where it came from. An old storage room beneath St. Augustine's Church. A room that had not been opened in years, and inside that room, someone had hidden the first piece of the truth. Not enough to tell me what happened, just enough to prove one thing. The story I had been forced to believe was impossible, so I started searching. Old church records, forgotten documents, names that appeared where they shouldn't, dates that didn't match. And every answer led me closer to one question. Why would a family with everything risk everything to keep one mother blamed? When I finally discovered the truth, I expected to find hate. I expected to find cruelty. But what I found was something much more dangerous. Fear. Because sometimes people don't destroy others because they don't love them. Sometimes they do it because they love the image of themselves more. And the person who let me carry 9 years of guilt was closer than I ever imagined. Before I tell you what was hidden inside the Whitaker family for 4 decades, you need to understand how I became part of their world and why everyone believed them instead of me. Before the Whitaker name became the reason people whispered when I entered a room, I thought it meant safety. I thought it meant family. I thought it meant belonging. I met Matthew Whitaker when I was 26 years old inside the Savannah County Courthouse. Not in a courtroom, not at some expensive charity event surrounded by champagne glasses and people pretending to care about causes. I met him in the basement archive room, the place where forgotten things went. Old property records, family documents, court files nobody had touched in decades. That was where I worked. Most people hated being sent down there. I loved it, because old papers told the truth. They didn't care how much money you had. They didn't care what your last name was. A document from 50 years ago could reveal something a powerful person spent their whole life trying to hide. Funny how life works. Back then, I had no idea those same skills would one day help me uncover the truth about my own family. Matthew came downstairs looking for an old case file connected to his father, Judge Robert Whitaker. Everyone in Savannah knew that name. Former state judge, community leader. The man who funded scholarships, restored historic buildings, and gave speeches about honor and responsibility. The kind of man people trusted before he even opened his mouth. Matthew walked into the archive wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But he looked completely lost. "Please tell me you understand this filing system," he said, staring at the shelves. "Because I'm pretty sure whoever organized this wanted future generations to suffer." I laughed. "That was me." His face changed instantly. "I'm sorry. You should be." I pulled the file from the shelf without looking. "You insulted my masterpiece." That was the first thing I noticed about Matthew. He laughed easily. Not the careful laugh wealthy people used when they were being polite, a real laugh. For 20 minutes, he forgot why he came downstairs. We talked about books, history, old houses, how every family had stories they repeated, and stories they buried. "You really believe every family has secrets?" he asked. I shrugged. "Every single one. Even good families? Especially good families." He smiled. "You sound very sure." "I work with records." I tapped the folder in his hand. "People lie. Paper usually doesn't." Years later, I would remember that conversation, and I would wonder if some part of the universe was warning me. Matthew and I started dating 2 weeks later. At first, I didn't understand why someone like him wanted someone like me. He came from generations of judges and attorneys. I came from a family of school teachers and mechanics. His childhood home had a name. Mine had a mortgage. But Matthew never made me feel small. Not then. He showed up after work with takeout when I stayed late organizing archives. He listened when I talked. He remembered things nobody else did. One night, I mentioned that my grandmother used to collect old postcards from every city she visited. 3 months later, on my birthday, Matthew gave me a framed postcard of Savannah from 1923. On the back, someone had written, "Home is not where you come from. It is where you are loved." I cried when I read it. Because I thought Matthew understood me. I thought he was different. Then I met his family. The Whitaker house sat beneath massive oak trees outside Savannah. White columns, iron gates, a driveway so long it felt like entering another world. There were portraits on the walls of men who all looked exactly the same. Serious faces, dark suits, Whitaker judges, Whitaker attorneys, Whitaker leaders. 100 years of reputation staring down at me. Caroline Whitaker welcomed me first, Matthew's mother. Elegant, quiet, the kind of woman who noticed everything but rarely said what she was thinking. "Elena," she said, taking my hands. "It's nice to finally meet the woman who got Matthew to stop working weekends." I liked her immediately. Maybe because she seemed as uncomfortable in that house as I did. Then Judge Robert Whitaker entered the room, and everything changed, not in an obvious way. That was the thing about Robert. He never needed to raise his voice. He controlled rooms by making everyone wait for his approval. "So this is Elena," he smiled. "Warm, perfect, practiced. Matthew talks about you constantly. All good things, I hope." "Of course," he looked at Matthew. "My son has always had excellent judgment. My son." I noticed how strongly he said those words, like they meant more than they should. At dinner, Robert asked me about my work. When I told him I managed historical records, he nodded. "Important job." That surprised me. Most people thought archives were boring. "History only survives because someone protects it," he continued. "Families are the same way." Matthew smiled. "Dad is serious about the Whitaker legacy. I can tell." Robert looked around the room at the portraits. "My grandfather protected this name. My father protected this name. I protected this name." Then he looked at Matthew. "And one day, he will too." For just a second, I saw Caroline stop moving. Her hand froze around her wine glass. Only for a moment. Then she smiled again. Back then, I thought I imagined it. I didn't. 2 years later, Matthew and I got married. The wedding was exactly what the Whitakers expected. Historic church, hundreds of guests, judges, politicians, people who shook my hand while looking over my shoulder for someone more important. But I didn't care, because when Matthew stood across from me and said his vows, I believed him. "I choose you, Elena." He squeezed my hands, "not because of where you come from." not because of what anyone expects. Because you are my home. For years afterward, I wondered when that stopped being true, or if it ever was. When I found out I was pregnant, the entire Whitaker family changed, especially Robert. I had never seen him emotional before. But when Matthew told him, his eyes filled. A boy? We don't know yet, I laughed. Robert smiled. It will be. The confidence in his voice surprised me. How do you know? Whitaker tradition. He touched Matthew's shoulder. Firstborn sons. 4 generations. Some things are meant to continue. Caroline looked away. Again, that tiny movement. Again, I ignored it. Because happiness makes you overlook things. And I was so happy when Samuel was born. Everything else disappeared. The family pressure, the expectations, the differences between our worlds. None of it mattered. He was just our son. 6 pounds, dark hair, tiny fingers that wrapped around mine like he already knew me. Matthew cried the first time he held him. Real tears. You're here, he whispered. You're finally here. For a while, we were exactly what I dreamed. A family. Robert visited almost every day. He brought a gift the morning we came home. A small velvet box. Inside was a silver rattle. Beautiful, old, engraved. This belonged to my father, Robert said. Then me. Then Matthew. And now Samuel. He placed it carefully in my hands. The Whitaker name continues. I smiled. I thought it was love. I didn't understand yet that some people confuse love with ownership. The first 3 weeks with Samuel were the happiest days of my life. I remember every detail. The way Matthew fell asleep beside his crib. The way Caroline hummed old songs while holding him. The way sunlight came through the nursery window every morning. And the silver rattle sitting on the shelf beside his tiny books. A symbol of family. A symbol of belonging. A symbol of everything I thought Samuel had been born into. Then came the night everything changed. It started quietly, no warning, no dramatic moment, just a feeling. The kind of feeling every mother understands. I looked at Samuel, and something inside me whispered, something is wrong. By morning, the entire Whitaker family was inside our house. Doctors were being called. Questions were being asked. Everyone wanted an explanation. And when they couldn't find one, they found something easier. Someone to blame. Me. People think the truth always wins because it is stronger. That is not always true. Sometimes the truth is quiet, and a powerful lie spoken by the right person can drown it out for years. I learned that because of the Whitakers. I learned that because when everything fell apart, nobody asked what happened. They only asked who was easiest to blame. The night Samuel was taken to St. Catherine's Hospital, I remember almost nothing clearly. Only pieces. The sound of Matthew calling my name, Caroline standing in the hallway with both hands over her mouth, Robert making phone calls before we even left the house. That was the first thing he did. Not cry, not panic, not freeze. He started calling people. Doctors he knew, hospital administrators, old colleagues, people who owed favors to the Whitaker name. At the time, I thought, he is protecting us. I didn't realize he was already protecting something else. For 3 days, the world became a blur of white walls and whispered conversations. I barely slept, barely ate. I kept replaying every hour before everything changed. The same questions, over and over. Did I miss something? Did I do something wrong? Could I have stopped this? That is the cruel thing about love. When you love someone enough, you will blame yourself before blaming anyone else. Matthew stayed beside me at first. He held my hand. He told me, "We'll get through this." I believed him, because I needed to. Then slowly, things changed. I noticed it in small ways. He started stepping into the hallway when Robert called. He stopped sharing what doctors told him. He answered questions with, "My father thinks," instead of, "I think." The man who promised I was his home was disappearing back into the house that raised him. One afternoon, I woke up in the chair beside Samuel's room. Matthew was gone. I found him at the end of the hallway with Robert. They didn't see me. "She loves him," Matthew said. "I know that." Robert's voice stayed calm. That was always his gift. He could destroy someone without ever sounding angry. Love and responsibility are two different things. A silence. Then Matthew said, "You really think Elena made a mistake?" I waited. I needed Robert to say no. I needed him to defend me, after everything, after calling me family, after placing that silver rattle in my hands. Instead, he said, "Good people make mistakes every day." 7 words. That was all it took. 7 words from a respected man. And suddenly, everyone started looking at me differently. The questions changed. Not, "What happened?" but, "What did Elena do?" Nobody accused me directly. They didn't have to. Suspicion is often more damaging when people pretend it is concern. Caroline stopped meeting my eyes. Family friends stopped calling. People from church sent messages saying, "We're praying for healing." Not truth, healing. As if the answer had already been decided. Then came the day my world stopped completely. I will not describe that moment. Some memories belong only to the people who survived them. All I will say is this. I walked into that hospital as Samuel's mother. I walked out as the woman everyone quietly blamed. The service was held at the same historic church where Matthew and I got married. The same white walls, the same wooden doors, the same stained glass windows. Only this time, nobody looked at me like I belonged there. They looked at Matthew. They hugged him. They told him, "You're so strong. Your family will get through this." The Whitakers always survive. The Whitakers. Not us. Not Elena and Matthew. The Whitakers. I stood 3 feet away from my husband and somehow felt like I was standing outside his family again. Robert gave the speech. Of course he did. Everyone expected him to. Judge Robert Whitaker. The man who always knew the right words. He talked about faith, about strength, about carrying pain with dignity. People cried. People admired him. And I stood there wondering why the man who lost his grandson somehow looked more composed than the mother who lost her child. Then came the silver rattle. The last time I saw it. Robert held the small velvet box before the service. "Samuel should have this," he said. "A piece of the family with him." I nodded. I trusted him. I trusted all of them. I watched him walk away holding it. For 9 years, I believed that was the last time anyone touched it. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, Matthew came home with divorce papers. I was sitting in Samuel's nursery, the room nobody wanted to enter anymore. The books were still on the shelf, the blanket still folded. The empty space where the silver rattle used to sit still caught my eye every morning. Matthew stood in the doorway. He didn't come inside. That hurt more than I expected. What is that? I already knew, but sometimes your heart asks questions your mind already answered. "Elena." "No," I shook my head. "Don't say my name like you're doing something kind," and his face changed. "I'm hurting too." "I know," my voice broke. "But everyone remembers that." A tear slipped down my cheek. "Everyone remembers you lost something. But when they look at me, they only remember what they think I caused." For a second, I saw my husband again, the real Matthew, the man from the archive room, the man who laughed with me, the man who cried when Samuel was born. Then his phone rang. Robert. I knew before I saw the screen. Matthew looked down, and that moment told me everything, because even then, even at the end of our marriage, he was still waiting for his father to tell him what to do. My family thinks space would help. There it was. My family. Not me. Not us. My family. The Whitaker name had finally become louder than my own. "What do you think, Matthew?" He didn't answer. And sometimes silence is the most honest answer someone can give. The divorce was fast, quiet, controlled. Exactly how the Whitakers handled everything. No public conflict. No messy details. No questions. Just a sad story about a tragedy that broke a marriage. That was the version Savannah accepted. Because it was easier, the respected family continued being respected. And the woman they blamed disappeared. I moved into a small apartment across town, changed back to Elena Brooks, left behind the house, the money, the people who once called me family. I only kept one box, Samuel's blanket, a few photographs, a tiny pair of shoes, the things nobody else thought mattered. Years passed. 1, 3, 5, 9. The world moved forward. Matthew returned to public life. Robert continued giving speeches about family values. The Whitaker name stayed untouched, and every year on Samuel's birthday, I asked myself the same question: what if they were right about me? That was the worst part, not losing them, believing them. Then, 9 years later, St. Augustine's Church announced they were renovating their old storage rooms. A volunteer called me. They found a box with my name on it. I almost didn't go, because some doors hurt too much to reopen, but something told me to. When I arrived, the woman handed me a small package covered in dust. "I think this belonged to your family," she said. My family. I almost laughed. I hadn't had one of those in years. I took the box home, placed it on my kitchen table, opened it, and everything I believed about the last 9 years broke apart, because sitting inside was the silver rattle, the one that should not exist, the one that should have been gone forever. And underneath it was a folded piece of paper, 4 words, written by someone who had been carrying a secret. "Forgive me." I lied. For 9 years, I thought the hardest thing I ever did was leave the Whitaker house. I was wrong. The hardest thing was leaving behind the version of myself who lived there. The woman who believed good people were always rewarded. The woman who believed love meant someone would stand beside you when everyone else walked away. The woman who believed the truth would protect her. I miss that woman sometimes. But I also knew she could never come back. Because once you discover how quickly people can rewrite your story, you never look at the world the same way again. After the divorce, I disappeared quietly. That was what everyone expected from me. No interviews, no accusations, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. The Whitakers appreciated silence. It kept everything clean. I moved into a small apartment above an antique store in downtown Savannah. The building was old, the floors creaked. The windows stuck when it rained. But it was mine. No family portraits watching me from the walls. No generations of expectations. No last name bigger than the people carrying it. Just a place where I could breathe. The antique store owner, Mrs. Bell, offered me work after seeing me spend almost an hour studying an old damaged photo someone brought in. "You notice details," she said. "Most people look at what's broken. You look for what survived." I didn't know why those words made me cry. Maybe because nobody had described me that way in years, so that became my life. Restoring old photographs, repairing damaged letters, preserving pieces of other people's histories. People brought me memories they thought were ruined. A wedding photo damaged by water, a soldier's letter torn in half, a family portrait faded almost beyond recognition. They would ask, "Can you save it?" And somehow, I always found a way, except with my own. I kept Samuel's things in a wooden box under my bed. For years, I couldn't open it. Not because I forgot him, because I remembered everything. The weight of him sleeping against me. The way Matthew whispered promises over his crib. The little silver rattle that was supposed to represent belonging. A family, a future, a lie. Every birthday I took the box out, placed it on the bed, sat beside it, and put it away unopened. That was as close as I could get. My sister Natalie was the only person who refused to let me vanish completely. She called every Friday. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. She came over anyway. She brought groceries, fixed things around the apartment, talked about normal life until I remembered I was still part of one. One night while we were washing dishes, she finally said what nobody else would. "Elena, what if they were wrong?" I froze. "Don't. What if they were?" "Natalie, no." She turned off the water. "For 9 years, you have treated their opinion like evidence." I looked away. They knew more than I did. Did they? I didn't answer, because deep down, there had always been a small voice asking the same thing. A voice I buried because hope was dangerous. Hope meant reopening everything. Hope meant admitting I lost 9 years believing something that might not even be true. And I wasn't ready for that. Meanwhile, the Whitakers continued being exactly who the world believed they were. Robert retired from the court and became a respected legal commentator. Charity events, public speeches, magazine interviews. He talked about justice, about responsibility, about protecting families. Every time I saw his face online, I closed the page. Not because I hated him, because a part of me still wanted him to be the man I thought he was. That was the strange thing about betrayal. Sometimes you don't just grieve what someone did. You grieve who you thought they were. Matthew never remarried. I knew because people made sure to tell me, as if that should comfort me, as if loneliness was proof of regret. It wasn't. Regret requires honesty, and Matthew had spent years avoiding the one conversation that mattered. Then, one rainy afternoon in October, everything changed. Not with a hospital call, not with a detective at my door, not with some dramatic confession. Just a box, a forgotten box sitting in the basement of an old church. St. Augustine's had been part of Savannah for almost a century. The Whitakers donated money there, hosted events there, held every major family ceremony there, including Samuel's memorial. During renovations, volunteers found several storage containers that had been misplaced years earlier. One had my name on it, Elena Whitaker. Seeing that name again felt strange, like finding a photograph of someone I used to know. The volunteer who called me sounded nervous. "I'm sorry if this brings up anything painful. We just thought you should decide what happens to these items." I almost told her to throw it away. I almost chose peace over answers, but something stopped me. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct, maybe the part of me that never fully believed the story I was given. The next morning, I drove to the church. The building looked exactly the same. That bothered me, because I had changed completely. But the place where my life fell apart had stayed untouched. Inside, a young volunteer named Grace led me downstairs. "I'm sorry," she said. "This should have been returned years ago." Returned. That word stayed with me. She handed me a small wooden box. Not expensive, not special, just an ordinary box. But my hand started shaking before I even opened it. Because somehow, I already knew. Inside was the silver rattle, Samuel's rattle. The one Robert took. The one everyone told me was gone forever. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. I picked it up carefully, and that was when I noticed something. A small mark on the bottom. Not damage, not age, something intentionally carved. 3 letters, EW, my initials. I remembered immediately. The night before Samuel was born, Matthew had secretly engraved it. He told me, so he always remembers where he came from. But the strange thing was, that engraving had never been shown publicly. Nobody knew about it. Except me, Matthew, and one other person. Robert. My stomach tightened. Underneath the rattle was a folded paper, old, yellowed. The handwriting was shaky, only 4 words. Forgive me, I lied. No signature, no explanation, just those words. For 9 years, I had been afraid of finding proof that everyone was right about me. I never prepared myself for the possibility that I would find proof they were wrong. I called Natalie. She arrived 15 minutes later. When she saw the rattle, her face changed. "Elena, I need to know. Elena, maybe you should wait." No, my voice surprised both of us. Because for the first time in almost a decade, I didn't sound broken. I sounded angry, not the kind of anger that destroys, the kind that wakes you up. I spent 9 years accepting answers from everyone else. I looked down at the note. Now I want my own. The next day, I brought the box to a private document examiner. I didn't call Matthew. I didn't call Robert. I didn't give the Whitakers a chance to explain something away before I understood it myself. 3 days later, the examiner called. "Elena, I need you to come in." My heart sank. Why? A pause. Because the handwriting matched someone. I closed my eyes. Who? Another pause. Then a name that made no sense. A name that opened a door I never knew existed. And suddenly I realized the silver rattle was not the secret. It was only the first piece of one. The name the examiner gave me was not Robert Whitaker. That was the first thing that confused me. For 3 days, I had prepared myself for that. I had prepared myself to hear that the man who questioned me, who influenced Matthew, who controlled the story afterward, had finally admitted what he did. But life rarely gives you the answer you expect. The handwriting belonged to someone else, someone who had been there from the beginning, someone I had forgotten about. "Thomas Reed," the examiner said. I stared at him. Who? He looked back at the file. Thomas Reed. The comparison came from an old church document you provided. I shook my head. I didn't provide any documents. He frowned. The handwriting database pulled it from archived St. Augustine's volunteer records. He turned the screen toward me. A scanned form appeared. Volunteer Maintenance Supervisor, Thomas Reed. And at the bottom, the same handwriting. The same uneven letters. The same sharp curve on the letter F. Forgive me, I lied. I stared at the name. Nothing, no memory, no connection. Just a stranger. Somehow, that scared me more. Because a stranger meant the story was bigger than my family. Do you recognize him? No. But even as I answered, something bothered me. A feeling. A small piece of memory trying to surface. The next morning, I went back to St. Augustine's. Not to confront anyone, not to make accusations, just to ask questions. That was something I had learned from restoring old photographs. Never force the picture. Find one piece, then another. Eventually, the full image reveals itself. Grace, the volunteer who found the box, searched through the church archives with me. Thomas Reed worked here for almost 30 years, she said. Retired 6 years ago. Is he still alive? She hesitated. He passed away last winter. My heart sank. Another dead end. Then she opened another folder. But before he died, he donated all his personal church records back here. Why? Grace looked through the papers. He wrote that some things belonged where people could find them. The words sent a chill through me. Some things. Not everything. Some things. For 2 hours we searched. Old schedules, letters, donation receipts. Nothing. Then Grace stopped. Elena, I looked up. What? She held a photograph. A church event. 9 years ago, a few weeks before everything happened. Robert stood in the center, Matthew beside him. Me beside Matthew, and behind us, Thomas Reed. I remembered him then, not clearly, just fragments. The older man who opened doors, the man who arranged chairs, the man everyone ignored because important families rarely noticed the people working around them. But Thomas noticed everything. On the back of the photo was a handwritten date and one sentence. I should have spoken sooner. My hand started shaking. Grace! She looked as confused as I felt. There's more. Inside the envelope was a small key, not a house key, not a car key, a storage key. The label attached said, Unit 118, Savannah Harbor Storage. I should have called someone, I know that now. But after 9 years of letting other people control my story, I needed to be the first person through that door. The storage facility was 20 minutes outside the city. The manager recognized Thomas's name immediately. Quiet guy, he looked through the paperwork. Paid this unit 10 years in advance. 10 years? Yeah, he shrugged. Said someone would come looking eventually. Someone. Me. The door to Unit 118 lifted with a loud metallic sound. Inside was almost nothing. A chair, a few boxes, and an old recording device. Sitting on top was a note. Elena Whitaker, not Brooks, Whitaker. The name I had stopped using. The name everyone thought I lost. I opened the note. Mrs. Whitaker, I am sorry. I spent years telling myself staying silent was not the same as lying. I was wrong. I saw something that night. And I let powerful people convince me that protecting a family name mattered more than protecting the truth. My chest tightened. That night, not after, not months later. That night. The recording device contained only one file, a conversation, dated 2 days after Samuel was gone. At first, I only heard static. Then voices, Thomas and Robert. Robert's voice was unmistakable, calm, controlled. The same voice that convinced everyone around him. You misunderstand what you saw. Thomas sounded nervous. I know what I saw. No, Robert replied. You saw a grieving family during a terrible moment. You start asking questions now, and what happens? A mother gets dragged through more pain. A family gets destroyed. The community loses trust. Silence. Then Thomas. But what about Elena? Another pause. A longer one. Then Robert said, Elena will survive. 3 words. Not angry, not emotional. That was what hurt. He said it like a calculation, like my pain was an acceptable cost. I sat alone in that storage unit listening to the recording 5 times. Because every time, I hoped I misunderstood. I didn't. But there was still one question. What did Thomas see? The answer was in the final box, a small envelope. Inside were printed photographs from an old church security camera. Not hospital footage, not some perfect evidence, just blurry images from the night before Samuel's service. The night Robert took the silver rattle. The images showed him entering the private memorial room, then leaving. But 15 minutes later, someone else entered, someone I never expected. Matthew. My breath stopped. No. I whispered it to nobody, because after everything, after all the pain, some part of me still protected him, still believed Matthew was just manipulated, just grieving, just weak. But the photograph showed him holding the box. The same box found years later. The same box containing the truth. I called Natalie. I could barely speak. He knew. She was silent. Matthew knew something. Elena? No. My voice cracked. Robert controlled the story, but Matthew helped bury it. That was the moment everything changed. Because for 9 years, I thought I lost my husband because he believed a lie. Now I had to face something worse. Maybe he knew there was a truth he chose not to find. The next morning, I received a call from Grace. Her voice was shaking. Elena, we found something else. What? When Thomas donated his files, there was one envelope we missed. Who was it for? A pause. Matthew. I went silent. What does it say? Grace hesitated. Elena. Tell me. It says... Another pause. Give this to Matthew when he finally admits why he stayed quiet. And that was when I understood. Thomas had not left evidence to expose what happened. He left a trail because he was waiting for one person to finally tell the truth. My ex-husband. For 9 years, I believed the most painful question was, why did everyone stop believing me? I was wrong. There was a harder question. What happens when you discover someone did believe you, but chose silence anyway? Because doubt hurts, but abandonment by someone who knew better leaves a different kind of scar. I didn't call Matthew immediately. The old version of me would have. The woman who needed answers, the woman who needed him to explain, the woman who would have given him another chance to control the story. But I was not that woman anymore. This time, I wanted the truth before the explanation, so I called an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Hale. She specialized in reopening old civil cases involving hidden evidence. I expected her to be skeptical. Most people were when they heard the Whitaker name. Instead, she spent 2 hours reviewing Thomas Reed's documents. The recording, the photographs, the timeline. When she finished, she removed her glasses and looked at me. Elena, do you understand what this proves? I shook my head. That I was lied to? No. She tapped the folder. That part is obvious. A pause. This proves people knew there were questions. And they made sure nobody asked them. Those words stayed with me, because that was exactly what happened. Nobody needed to create a perfect lie. They only needed to make the truth inconvenient enough that everyone avoided it. Rebecca requested access to old records, church documents, private correspondence, insurance files, family communications. The Whitakers fought immediately. Of course they did. Their attorney sent a statement calling the claims an unfortunate attempt to reopen a painful family tragedy. Painful family tragedy. Not Samuel, not me. A tragedy. The same careful language they had used for 9 years. But this time, something was different. I was not alone. Thomas Reed had left more than evidence. He left a map, and piece by piece, the picture became clearer. Robert Whitaker had not caused what happened to Samuel. That was the truth I had to accept. For years, a part of me wanted one person to blame. One villain, one explanation. But real damage is rarely that simple. Robert's mistake was something different. He saw uncertainty, and he chose the version that protected his family. When questions appeared, he buried them. When Thomas came forward, he dismissed him. When I was blamed, he allowed it. Not because he hated me, because admitting the truth meant admitting the Whitakers were not untouchable. And for Robert, the family image had become more important than the family itself. But Matthew was the part I couldn't understand, until I finally opened Thomas's envelope, the one addressed to him. Inside was a letter, and a copy of a message Matthew sent Thomas 6 months after everything happened. 6 months. Not 9 years. 6 months. Matthew had written, "I keep thinking about what you said you saw. I keep wondering if we missed something. But reopening this will destroy my father, and it will destroy what little is left of us." I read that sentence 10 times. What little is left of us. Not me, not Samuel. Us, the Whitakers. Even then, he was protecting the name, not the truth. I finally understood. Matthew didn't walk away because he was certain I was responsible. He walked away because he was afraid I wasn't. Because if I was innocent, then he had abandoned his wife when she needed him most. And some people would rather live with a comfortable lie than face an unforgivable truth. 3 weeks later, the story became public. Not because I leaked it, because court filings became available. The same newspapers that once praised the Whitaker family legacy were suddenly asking different questions. Not about wealth, not about reputation, about accountability. Robert resigned from 2 foundation boards. Invitations stopped arriving. People who once repeated his opinions without question started wondering what else they had accepted too easily. But the moment everyone remembers came during the hearing, the first time I saw them again. Robert walked in first, older, quieter. For the first time in my life, he looked like just a man, not a name, not a legacy, just a man who made choices. Then Matthew entered. I expected anger, defensiveness, excuses. Instead, he looked ashamed. That was somehow harder, because anger would have made him easier to hate. When I was asked to speak, I walked to the front of the room holding 6 pages Rebecca helped me prepare. Dates, facts, evidence. Everything I spent 9 years wishing I had. But when I looked at Matthew, then Robert, I folded the pages. Because they already knew what they did. I didn't need to convince them. I needed to finally speak for myself. For 9 years, I thought this moment would fix everything. My voice shook. But it doesn't. Because the truth cannot give me back the years I lost. The room went silent. I looked at Robert. You taught everyone that responsibility mattered. But responsibility is easy when admitting the truth costs you nothing. His eyes lowered. Then I looked at Matthew. That was harder. You were supposed to know me. A pause. You were the person who promised to stand beside me when the world didn't. My voice cracked. But when the moment came, you looked at the people doubting me and decided it was safer to stand with them. Matthew wiped his eyes. Years ago, that would have broken me. Not anymore. I spent a long time asking why I wasn't enough for you to defend. I took a breath. Now I understand. That was never a question about my worth. It was about your courage. After the hearing, Matthew waited outside. Elena. For a second, I almost kept walking, but I stopped. Not because he deserved a conversation, because I deserved an ending. I need you to know something. He struggled with the words. I didn't know. I looked at him. Not at first. No. He admitted quietly. Not at first. That honesty surprised me. Then why? A long silence. Because when I started questioning everything, his voice broke. I realized what it would mean if I was wrong. What? That I left you alone. Finally. 9 years later. The truth, not about Samuel, about us. And I couldn't face that. I nodded slowly. Thank you. He looked confused. For what? For finally telling the truth. Hope appeared in his eyes, just a little. The same hope I carried for years. Elena? No, I stopped him gently. Truth explains what happened. It doesn't erase it. His face fell, and for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for fixing his pain. A month later, I received a letter from Robert. Handwritten, not through attorneys, not through assistants. Just him. Elena, I spent my entire life believing protecting my family meant protecting our name. I was wrong. A name is not a family. People are. And I failed one of mine. You, I read it once, then placed it beside Matthew's apology. Not because everything was forgiven, not because everything was repaired, because those apologies belonged to them. But my future belonged to me. The final piece came from Thomas Reed. Inside the last envelope was a photograph I had never seen. Me, Matthew, Samuel. Taken quietly at the church, before everything changed. On the back, Thomas had written, "This is what I should have protected. Not the Whitaker name. This, a family." I cried when I saw it. Not because it reopened the wound. Because for the first time, the memory belonged to me again. Not their version, not their mistake. Mine. And after 9 years, that felt like justice. The strangest thing about getting the truth back is realizing it does not return everything that was taken with the lie. I thought once everyone knew, once people finally understood, once my name was cleared, I would wake up and become the woman I used to be. I didn't. Because healing is not a doorway you walk through. It is a road you build one step at a time. Some days, I felt free. Other days, I felt angry about all the years I spent believing a story that was never mine. Both were true. A year after the hearing, I moved out of the apartment above the antique store. Not because I hated it. That little place saved me. It gave me somewhere to exist when I didn't know how to live. But I realized something. I had built my entire life around surviving what happened. And I wanted more than survival. I bought a small house outside Savannah. Nothing like the Whitaker estate. No gates, no columns, no rooms designed to impress strangers. Just a small white house with a garden and a porch where the morning sun came through the trees. The first thing I unpacked was Samuel's box. For 9 years, that box lived hidden away. Under beds, inside closets, anywhere I could keep the memories close, but not too close. This time, I placed it on a shelf in the living room, not as a wound, as a proof. Proof that he existed. Proof that I loved him. Proof that no lie could erase what was real. The silver rattle sat beside his photograph. For a long time, I wondered if I should keep it. After everything connected to it, after all the pain, but then I understood. The rattle was never the problem. People were. Objects do not carry betrayal. They carry whatever meaning we choose to give them. And I chose to let it mean love again. My relationship with Natalie changed too. For years she blamed herself. Not publicly, not dramatically, just in small ways. Extra phone calls, extra apologies. Always trying to make up for time we couldn't get back. One afternoon while we were sitting on my porch, she said, "I should have fought harder for you." I looked at her. Yes. She went quiet. I think she expected me to say, "No, it's okay." But healing does not require pretending something didn't hurt. "Yes," I repeated. "You should have." Tears filled her eyes. "But you came back." I reached for her hand. "And that matters too." That was something I had learned. Forgiveness does not mean rewriting the past. It means deciding what future is still possible. With Natalie, there was one. With Matthew, it was different. For months after the hearing, he sent letters, not constantly, not trying to pressure me. Just pieces of honesty he should have given me years earlier. He wrote about therapy, about leaving the Whitaker company, about finally understanding how much of his life had been built around earning Robert's approval. The last letter was the only one I answered. He wrote, "I spent years thinking losing Samuel was the moment that changed me. I was wrong. The moment that changed me was when I chose my fear over you. I am sorry I needed proof before I gave you the trust you deserved." I read that sentence several times. Then I wrote back, "I hope you become someone who never makes another person prove their pain before you believe it." That was all. No anger, no invitation, no second chance. Just an ending. Sometimes people think forgiveness means opening the door again. But sometimes forgiveness is simply putting down what someone else left you carrying and walking away lighter. Robert Whitaker changed the most, or maybe for the first time. I saw him without the image surrounding him, the respected judge, the community leader, the man everyone listened to. All those titles disappeared. What remained was a father who realized too late that protecting a reputation cost him his family. He sold the Whitaker estate 6 months later. The house that was supposed to represent generations of success. The house where every wall told visitors, important people live here. I asked him once why. He looked at me and said, because I finally understood something. What? I spent my life preserving a house, a pause, and forgot the people inside it. It was the closest Robert Whitaker ever came to admitting he was wrong. And for him, that was a lot. We never became a perfect family. I don't think those exist. But we became honest. And after living inside a lie for 9 years, honesty felt like enough. 2 years after everything came out, I opened my own restoration studio. But I changed what we restored. Not just photographs, not just documents, stories. Families came to us with old letters, damaged memories, pieces of their past they thought were too painful to touch. We helped preserve them. Because I believed something now that I didn't before. The painful parts of your story still belong to you. You don't have to erase them to move forward. On the front wall of the studio, I hung one photograph. Samuel, Matthew, me. The photo Thomas Reed saved. People sometimes asked who took it. I always told them. Someone who learned too late that silence can hurt people. Thomas was not a hero. He waited too long. But eventually, he chose the truth. And sometimes imperfect courage is still courage. On Samuel's 10th birthday, I returned to St. Augustine's Church. For years, I avoided that place. I thought buildings could hold pain. Maybe they can, but they can hold healing too. I sat in the garden behind the church where the flowers were starting to bloom. The same garden where Matthew and I once talked about all the things we wanted to teach our son. Kindness, honesty, courage. The things adults spend their whole lives trying to learn. I held the silver rattle in my hands, and for the first time, I didn't think about everything I lost. I thought about what remained. Love remained. Truth remained. I remained. For 9 years, I waited for someone to tell me I was innocent. But the most important moment was not when the world believed me. It was when I finally believed myself. Because the most dangerous lies are not the ones other people tell about you. They are the ones you start repeating in your own voice. Maybe someone listening right now understands that. Maybe someone made you carry responsibility that was never yours. Maybe someone convinced you that their version of you was the truth. If that is you, remember this. A person's confidence does not make them right. A family name does not make someone honest. And years spent believing something do not make it true. You are allowed to question the story someone handed you. You are allowed to search for answers. You are allowed to rebuild, not into the person you were before. Sometimes that person is gone. Sometimes life changes you too much. But different does not mean ruined. Different means you survived long enough to become someone new. For years, I thought Samuel's story ended with what happened to him. I was wrong. His story continued every time I chose kindness after cruelty, truth after silence, and courage after fear. Because the people we love never truly disappear from our lives. They remain in the choices we make because they existed. And Samuel's life, no matter how short, changed every part of mine. The Whitaker name was once the most powerful thing in my world. Now it is just a name. The most powerful thing I carry is something nobody can take. The truth. And finally, it belongs to me. At Botsworth na Icon.